Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 314. It's Monday and it's President's Day here in the United States. And so I thought I would build an episode around President's Day. Originally, I had the title Royal Presidency, but that seemed like a little bit too much. And plus, when I started writing down some thoughts, that probably wasn't going to be the more appropriate title. One of the things I would always ask in all my classes, I do it in the middle school as well. I ask my students who the president of Switzerland is. And everyone scratches their heads and says, wow, I don't know. Not that they would know anyone's, any country's president. I mean, they barely know uh, very few of them even know what the capital of Canada is. It's an American thing. We just really don't give a crap about anybody else in the world, which is part of the problem here in the United States. But anyway, so I would ask who the president of Switzerland was, and no one would know. And I said, yeah, there's seven of them because they have cantons. And so if they wanted to make a decision, they'd all seven, or I guess they would have to have some sort of agreement. I don't know if it's a consensus, if they needed to have everyone agree in order for a certain law to be passed in there. But otherwise, no one really cares who the president is and what they said that day. And wouldn't it be great? I would say to them, wouldn't it be great if no one knew who the president of the United States was? Because it wouldn't matter what they did, what the president did. That would be kind of awesome. And usually that discussion would come up when people would say, oh, but we need a strong government to have a strong military so that, people don't try to take advantage of us. Uh, the Mises Institute does a great job in talking about some of the worst presidents in American history, thanks to Thomas DiLorenzo, who he loves going to town on FDR, Abraham Lincoln, and oh, Woodrow Wilson. And then Peter Schiff, every President's Day, he has a episode that where he pushes back against this whole President's Weekend thing and wants to remind everyone it's Washington's birthday, right? So originally it was Washington's birthday, then it was Washington and Lincoln's birthday, and then it just suddenly became President's Day. But there are a lot of presidents that are not that good, right? Like maybe Joe Biden, perhaps. Maybe you don't want to celebrate him on President's Day, but by naming it President's Day, then all the presidents deserve the same level of honor. And to Peter Schiff, no one comes close to George Washington because he could have been a king. It was offered to him and he declined. And all of this other, he goes into it if you ever have a chance and you're not already a regular listener of Peter Schiff, then you really should. I mean, if you are a big crypto person, then maybe you already know who he is and you don't like him, and now you're not going to listen to me anymore. But anyway, so today, so that's President's Day, and I thought we would focus mainly on one particular president, and that would be Theodore Roosevelt, not Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. So TR, not FDR. It turns out that they were distantly related, fifth cousins, but I'm not really sure you can call it sort of insider family corruption, kind of like the way the Bushes were. But anyway, so the progressive era is a time period in U.S. history from 1900 to 1917. 1917 is probably the end date because that's when the United States entered World War One. So I'm basically using my history textbook that I'm using for my eighth graders. Okay. And it's a very simplified history book, but it gives you an idea of how history is taught to young people in America these days. And plus, since these episodes are relatively short, It's convenient, right? It's a short summary. The more detailed, the longer things become. But anyway, from the text about the Progressive Era, I quote, before government stayed out of the way, but now demanded reform. Small government easily managed farmers and small businesses, but could not control the power of corporate trusts, the exploitation of friendless workers, and the corruption of political machines. Either the government had to expand to control these things, or it had to accept being controlled by them. Uh, End quote. So it was a prosperous time, right? The progressive era was prosperous, but it basically means that people had more time to focus on the pitiful, the underprivileged, the poor, the people who were perceived to be exploited in society. There's a book by Franz de Waal, Dewaal, and it's called Good Natured. We had to teach that book in one of the courses that I taught. And he had this chart, sort of an illustration of concentric circles. And so the center circle was the self. When resources are slim, when there aren't many, you are basically focused on surviving. And so you only care about yourself. If you have more resources, then the circle of concern extends to family and so on and so forth, right? So the wealthier a society becomes, the more it is less concerned about the individual and the more that it is concerned about community, society, the world. Right. And one could make the argument that because the United States had achieved such a level of wealth, that of course it's going to start caring about the environment now, right? Because starvation is not a worry for most people. I interpret it as to say that people now had time to feel guilty, right? So they have all this wealth, and look at all these people who do not. So we should do something for them. At the same time, muckraking became a thing. Muckraking was a name that was given to sensational journalists who would sensationalize things, right? And they would publish their articles in popular magazines. Yeah, they read magazines back in those days. They would publish these, horrible stories of abuse, of oppression, of exploitation, and it got a lot of readers. Right, probably among the wealthy because they felt so guilty and they were so bored, they needed to read something a little bit different. And the underclass liked it, I guess, because it sort of highlighted their own situation. So muckraking was a name that was given to all of these journalists, I believe by TR himself. Now, part of this muckraking thing is to sensationalize issues. In other words, it might not have been a society-wide problem. It might not have been a problem that required government intervention. But because of the way that it was portrayed in a lot of the writing, people demanded that government do something, that government should reform, what was going on. So McKinley was running for president and he was elected, and they made TR, Theodore Roosevelt, his vice president, right? So back in the day, it was very strategic who was the vice president. And TR was made vice president to get him out of New York, right? In other words, he was interfering with the way things were done in New York. And so they wanted him out of the way. Let's make him vice president. He was 42 at the time. And then they realized, well, as long as McKinley doesn't get assassinated, we're fine. He's out of the way. He's insignificant. He's in a powerless office. And so maybe people will forget about him. But of course, McKinley got assassinated, and so he became president. And so this is what the text says about Theodore Roosevelt. It says he revitalized the office of the presidency. He remade the presidency in his own image and left it as one of the most powerful offices in the world. He is considered to be among our nation's greatest presidents, right? And I believe his face is on one of the four on Mount Rushmore. I'm just going to quick check that. Yes, it is. I got this. I started second guessing myself, but yes, TR is one of the four faces on Mount Rushmore because he's one of the greatest presidents ever. Uh, let's see. So his motto, campaign plank, was the square deal. Everyone did not get the best cards in the game, but the dealing must be done fairly, right? So square deal means that the dealing of the cards in a card game is square, it's fair. Okay. Uh, so what is it? It's not to be confused with the Navy's square meal. Okay. But anyway, but really, is it fair? If you think about it, if he revitalized the presidency, he's holding all this power. Does he really deal the cards fairly? Or that basically is how he portrays it? It's likely that that's the way he portrayed it, right? And so he began his rule by going after trusts, which the book says has grown fat and prosperous under McKinley's presidency. Basically, they got corrupt, okay? And so he went after the trusts, which is what we would call sort of like monopolies today, but not really because it basically different businesses to streamline the process of production. And so they would be a kind of a trust. So you would have a parent company over all these smaller branches of a business, right? So if it was oil, it would be the company that got the oil out of the ground, then the company who refined it, then the company that distributed it, things like this. And so the trust would be in charge of all of these. And so then he used the Sherman Antitrust Act against a holding company of J.P. Morgan, which controlled the railroads. And the railroads were the biggest businesses at the time. And so J.P. Morgan's trust pretty much controlled all the railroads in the northeast of the United States. All right. So, and he went after, and he was successful, right? So that holding company had to dissolve. And because he was successful, it gave him momentum to do it 40 times, 40, 4 times 10. He did it 40 times and he won most of the time. And he got the nickname Trust Buster, right? He broke up trusts, uh, but he didn't move against far more trusts, right? There were many more than 40 trusts. And so he went after 40. Which 40, right? I mean, that becomes an issue. How do you know to go after this one, not that one? And the other trusts, he basically used the threat of antitrust action to force the corporations to accept more regulations, which of course they did, right? So this is how government increases, how the bureaucracy increases, right? Do it my way, or your company is going to have to dissolve. If you agree, then you have to allow me to regulate your industry. Okay. And so he was the first president since the Civil War who actually led the government. This is what the text is saying. He proposed legislation and then followed it through the process. Instead of just proposing it and let the legislative body take over, he actually followed it through the process, making sure that it was going to pass. And so the text ends by saying, "Today we expect that of a president." Oh, okay. And it's TR, Theodore Roosevelt, who established the custom. Aha. So here we go. So why did I want to call it royal presidency? Because that's kind of the way presidents act today. But, if you know history apparently better than me, then you realize that this behavior on the part of presidents started with Theodore Roosevelt in the progressive era in the early 1900s. Another aspect of his presidency, and you're going to love this, is his motto of speak softly and carry a big stick. You will go far, right? So speak softly, like be nice, be polite, but carry a big stick. And so people are listening to you, the words you're saying, but they're looking at the stick, right? And so if you don't do or agree or go along with whatever Roosevelt is proposing, he might use the stick on you, basically beat you with the stick. And this is first used in Panama, of all places. The the coincidences with TR and Trump, it's interesting, right? So Panama still did not have a canal at the time, right? But prior to the incident in Panama was the Spanish-American War, which started because of an uprising in Cuba, which, I have a little suspicion that maybe U.S. might have been involved a little bit in there. And the battleship Maine exploded, right? I don't know if you remember that from your history. And the battleship Maine blew up because one of the sailors was smoking in the engine room. And back in those days, they used coal to power the ship. And coal means coal dust, which is highly flammable. So someone lit up and then blew up the battleship, right? But they blamed the Spanish, and so then we had the Spanish-American War, and then you had the American Navy going to the Philippines and that whole thing blowing up the Spanish Navy over there. And so it made the United States, a very powerful country. It all of a sudden became a powerful country. So back to Panama. The British and America had an agreement to share control of Panama, that area, and they were trying to build a canal. Well, the French were anyway. But the British and America said that they would share control if it was ever built. Um, Now, the French encouraged the Panamanians to rebel against Colombia. Colombia, which is right next to Panama, um, you're right, Panama was part of Colombia. And so the Panamanians rebelled this time at the urging of, they did that every once in a while, right? They wanted to be independent, but they couldn't break away from Colombia because Colombia is a much bigger country. Then the French said, oh, do it again, right? So it looks like the French encouraged the rebellion in 1903, but I have my suspicions, right? So uh, Panama rebels against Colombia. Colombia then sends troops to put down the rebellion, but the U.S. Navy intercedes. He blocks Colombia from interceding, right, and putting down the rebellion. And as soon as the revolutionary government in Panama declares independence, Roosevelt recognizes them immediately, right? At once. It's like, huh, almost like he knew it was coming. And so perhaps in the same way that England often acts as the ambassador for the United States in places like Ukraine, right? That the French were doing it for the United States here in Panama to throw off the suspicion. Oh no, it was the French who encouraged the rebellion. It wasn't us, right? We only just interceded conveniently, knowing that it was going to happen. Our Navy was right there, so it's a little suspicious, right? And knowing how US does it now, they probably were inspired from back in the day. So and it's just interesting, right? So Roosevelt acknowledges Panama as an independent country, and now they can make an agreement to build a canal directly with the friendly Panamanian government, right? So Colombia rejected Roosevelt's proposal to build the canal, and which really upset Roosevelt. And so uh, I'm wondering if he got so upset that he's like, "Oh yeah, that's what you're going to do? Well, we'll just have a little rebellion then, and then I'll negotiate with the new government in Panama," which is classic, something that we see happening over and over and over again here by the United States today. And so, wouldn't it be interesting if this is when it started, this time period, because of Theodore Roosevelt? And then there's the Great White Fleet. No, it's not racist. Okay. It's called the Great White Fleet because they were flying the white flag of peace, right? So truce, parley, call it whatever you will. So basically, Roosevelt sends part of the Navy, which at this point is the second largest Navy in the world. He sends them around the world in 1907, right? Because the Japanese and the Russians just had a war. Russia lost, And Japan then wanted to negotiate fair treatment of Japanese descendants in America, right? Because there were a lot of segregation stuff going on in California against the Japanese. And so Roosevelt resolved that issue, but he wanted to make sure that everyone knew that he didn't have to, right? And so he wanted to intimidate everybody. And so even though they were flying the white flag of truce, right? Uh, it was on a battleship, right? So there's the stick of intimidation. So I just want to wrap this up by saying, well, so TR, he was really active in increasing the power of the office of president, right? It wasn't always this way, but history books and historians will paint this as a great time of progress. It's the progressive era where government now is increasing in size and taking charge and taking control of our lives. How great is that? And of course, with the beginning of the central bank, the Federal Reserve in 1913, there was no going back. So the progressive era followed the Gilded Age. And Gilded Age, you know, is when you have something precious covering something cheap and ugly, right? So gold over wood, right? So it looks like it's, ooh, solid gold, but no, it's just gold over wood. And during the Gilded Age, that's when there was lots of freedom and government stayed out of business affairs. That's the laissez-faire, right? So laissez-faire was a period of time when laissez-faire reigned. And so therefore, that's where all this extreme wealth had come from. And, you know, we can go into that some more, but too much for this episode. So I'll leave that for another episode. So Trump reminds me a lot of TR and that's bad. But Trump's activism so far is not in increasing the size of government, but rather decreasing the size of government. And so it's almost like, and I've said this before, but it's almost like, and I'm not becoming a fanboy of Trump. I'm a fanboy of all of the things that are happening. I mean, how can you not celebrate, you know, an audit of all of these bureaucracies, you know, that the threat of the audit of the Fed, an examination and an audit of the gold supposedly that's at Fort Knox. I mean, come on, how can you not celebrate this? And so Trump's activism so far is in the shrinking of government. You know, I wouldn't have liked Theodore Roosevelt as either, right? I wouldn't have liked him either because he seems like that kind of bombastic kind of person that you know, it's like, okay, well, he's in the room now, so I'll just sort of sit in my corner and be forgotten, you know. So I don't think he had time for anyone else, right? No time except for himself. But Trump, although he might look like him in many ways, is shrinking government, right? Like, I think as a lifelong businessman, he knows that it's government interference which makes life so difficult, perhaps, sometimes. I mean, he's proposing to cut the military spending by 50%. I mean, when was there? I don't think there has been a president that has even said that, much less thought it, you know. So anyway, so what's not to like about what's going on? And if they do audit the Fed, they do audit the gold that's supposedly at Fort Knox. I mean, come on, this would be something, a different kind of revolution. I wonder how the history books would describe this age. And I got to tell you, I'm surprised every day at the things that he's doing. And like I said, since he's shrinking government, right, then all of this power that he's wielding, I think he has a plan for that as well, so that the next president, if it turns out to be a Democrat, there's no way for that person to bring back a lot of the stuff that he has eradicated, because you know that's what they're thinking. So those are some of the thoughts to have on President's Day, a celebration of all presidents, maybe, you know, but a lot of them seriously were not good for the country, like Theodore Roosevelt. Add that one to the list of bad presidents that the Mises Institute always talks about. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your week. I'll talk to you guys next time.